The morning rose with the reluctant grayness of a battlefield that had not yet made up its mind about the day. A thin layer of fog clung low across the training grounds, wrapping itself around the parade field like a shroud. Boots thudded against the packed dirt in restless, uneven rhythms, as new cadets gathered in tight clusters, half awake, half afraid, all waiting for the storm they knew was coming. The air held that unmistakable military stillness, the kind that always occurred seconds before a harsh whistle, a shouted order, or the arrival of a man who fed on discipline the way others breathed. In that dim yet unforgiving morning light, the field resembled a stage constructed for judgment. Dust shifted with each footstep, swirling upward into the fog like ghosts rising from forgotten wars. Jackets clung stiffly to rigid backs, shoulders tensed as anticipation thickened the atmosphere. Every cadet had been warned about mornings like this, PT days when bodies broke, wills cracked, and only the disciplined emerged with dignity intact. Among them stood Olivia Hale, quiet and motionless as if carved out of the fog itself. She did not blend in, though she tried. There was something too still, too measured, too deliberate about the way she occupied space, like someone constantly calculating how little attention she could attract while carrying a secret weight no one else could see. Her dog tags rested against her chest, muted by the fabric of her shirt, catching only the faintest sliver of morning light as if even they understood the value of silence. The field vibrated with low whispers. Not the casual murmurs of tired cadets, but the subtle, creeping gossip unique to military recruits who needed an easy target to release their anxieties upon. The fog swallowed their expressions but not their tones, tones sharp enough to cut but quiet enough to be denied later. Rumors spread fast in places built on discipline, faster still when aimed at someone who never defended herself. It happened the moment she stepped forward and quietly offered the folded slip, a simple PT exemption form, edges softened from being held too tightly, too long. A paper shield in a world that respected only pain, sweat, and performance. And with that single motion, Olivia Hale became the morning's sacrifice. Whispers grew louder as the fog thinned. Cadets craned necks, seeking confirmation of what they'd heard, another recruit trying to escape physical training. Another body unwilling to suffer like the rest. Another weak link asking for mercy in a place that despised mercy. The shifting air carried judgment like embers drifting across dry brush. No one knew the truth, no one cared. In the hierarchy of military training, perception became reality faster than facts ever could. Then the atmosphere snapped. Colonel Briggs strode into view with the deliberate heaviness of a man who commanded not just obedience, but fear. Every step struck the ground with the authority of someone who had seen war, endured war, and become shaped, sharpened, by its cruelty. He was the kind of officer who measured respect not by words but by how many spines stiffened upon his arrival. And in that moment, every back straightened, every breath tightened, every heartbeat fell into sync with silent dread. His presence tore through the remaining fog, leaving clarity that felt colder than the air itself. His gaze swept across the cadets like a blade drawn from a scabbard, clinical, unyielding, searching for imperfections. And then it landed on Olivia. A silent pause stretched thin between them, the kind of pause that could break more cleanly than bone. She remained motionless, refusing to shrink, refusing to rise, refusing to give the moment any emotional reaction it demanded. Her lack of response only stoked the colonel's growing contempt. To him, the exemption slip was not a request, it was an insult. A challenge. A stain on a culture built upon pushing past human limits. And so, in a single moment of orchestrated disdain, he lifted the paper, turning it into a symbol of weakness before the gathered platoon. His posture alone carried humiliation like a broadcast signal, and the cadets received it clearly. They watched Olivia with new eyes now, not curiosity, but conviction. Guilt by perception. Weakness by assumption. Humiliation by collective agreement. Yet Olivia remained still. Completely still. Not numb, but controlled. Not unaware, but prepared. She absorbed the moment like a soldier trained to take incoming fire without revealing where the wound might land. In the ranks, Emily, one of the few cadets who didn't join the cluster of whispering, studied Olivia with a different lens. Emily saw details others were too eager to overlook. The way Olivia shifted her weight, careful not to overextend the left side of her body. The subtle tightening of her jaw each time she inhaled, as though dragging air through a rib cage that remembered pain too vividly. The faint tremor in her hand, not from fear, but from something deeper, something internal, quiet, and unresolved. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't avoidance. It was containment. But containment meant nothing in a place ruled by men like Colonel Briggs. He moved closer, closing the distance between authority and vulnerability with calculated calm. His shadow fell across Olivia, consuming her in its reach, pressing against her refusal to react. The morning fog swirled around them both, a silent storm forming at their feet. When she denied his demand, calmly, quietly, giving no justification, the atmosphere shifted into something darker. Her refusal was not defiance, yet it struck him like it was. For a man obsessed with exposing fakers, her steady poise felt like bait, an insult to his instinct, a silent accusation against his judgment. Power dynamics collided, though only one side acknowledged the battlefield forming between them. The humiliation escalated. Not in volume, there were no shouted threats, no barked orders, but in tone, in posture, in the tension radiating through every cadet watching. The field became a spotlight, and Olivia its unwilling centerpiece. She held her composure with a kind of discipline the colonel failed to recognize, or perhaps recognized too well, the discipline of someone conditioned to hide pain, to endure silently, to never let suffering be visible enough to be exploited. Then came the moment no one expected. Her dog tag slipped from her hand, falling into the dirt with a muted clink. It was small, insignificant, yet the sound sliced through the air with surgical precision. She bent to pick it up. Slowly. Too slowly. The fog thinned enough to reveal the brief shimmer of agony flickering through her posture. A subtle but unmistakable wince carved itself across her ribs as her torso dipped. Her shoulders stiffened instinctively. And just beneath the hem of her shirt, for a single heartbeat, a thin scar, pale and jagged, the shape of a memory carved by violence, caught the morning light. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, swallowed again by fabric and restraint. But the camera of the world didn't forget. And neither did Emily, whose eyes widened with quiet understanding. To others, the moment passed. To Olivia, it was a revelation she'd failed to bury deep enough. To Colonel Briggs, it was something worse, proof that she was hiding something, though he interpreted it not as trauma, but as deceit. His obsession sharpened. The humiliation no longer served as punishment, it became investigation. A hunt. And Olivia, silent as stone, became the prey he was determined to corner. She offered no resistance, no explanation, no justification for her trembling breath or guarded posture. Her silence infuriated him more than any outburst could have. And in that silent battle of wills, something irreversible happened. With calculated finality, the colonel seized her medical file. A thin folder containing truths she'd fought hard to bury. He held it with the solemnity of a man convinced he had uncovered a lie, when in reality he held the fragile evidence of wounds far beyond his comprehension. The cadet stood frozen as he declared his next move, not in words, but in action and expression alone. The kind of action that echoed across the formation like a distant detonation. A mandatory demonstration. Public. Undeniable. Inescapable. Scheduled in front of the entire platoon. The fog thickened again, as if the morning itself recoiled from what was coming next. Olivia didn't react. Not a twitch. Not a breath out of rhythm. Only a quiet narrowing of her gaze, the faintest sign that she understood what this meant, that the secret she had carried like a buried landmine was now being dragged into open terrain. Shame simmered beneath her calm exterior, yet it did not break through. Restraint held her like steel bracing against a storm. And behind that restraint, mystery rose like smoke from a long-extinguished fire, dangerous, unpredictable, and impossible to hide for much longer. The cadets dispersed under the colonel's command, but their glances lingered. Olivia remained standing in the settling silence, her dog tag clutched tightly in her hand as the weight of the coming ordeal pressed against her chest. The field grew quiet. The fog thinned. The sun finally breached the horizon, cold and colorless. And somewhere deep beneath Olivia's calm, something old stirred, a memory, a scar, a shadow. Something that had never healed. The morning ended not with orders, nor with discipline, but with a promise of confrontation, one that would expose what she had spent years trying to keep buried. And as the colonel walked away, holding her medical file like a weapon, the narrative of the day carved itself into the dirt with finality. This was no longer about PT. This was no longer about discipline. This was a collision course between truth and perception, and only one of them would survive the coming storm. A gray dawn crawls over the barracks like a restless promise. The air smells of damp concrete and adrenaline, metallic in its edge, charged with the silent beating of heart drums. In those first pale moments, Olivia feels the weight of every breath, each one heavier than the last, as though her lungs themselves carry secrets she cannot speak. The sky above the parade ground holds no warmth today, just a muted whisper of light, and she senses that something is coming. Something she cannot refuse. She moves through the ranks as if underwater, her legs stiff, her spine humming with a distant ache she hides behind rigid posture. Around her, cadets stand in neat formation, strong shoulders, disciplined stances, unbreakable facades. Their eyes are sharp, assessing, the air between them crackles with expectation. A surprise PT inspection, the colonel's voice still echoes in her memory, low and unwavering, the words delivered as though they were a verdict more than an order. No exemptions mentioned. None honored. She has no choice now but to run. Every step at the beginning feels bearable, a slow unfolding. But soon her muscles tighten, pulses quicken, and a tremor runs through her. She tastes the salt of sweat on her lips, the iron bitter and present. The ground under her boots is pitiless concrete, unforgiving. She shifts her weight, braces herself. Her breath comes in ragged pulses, and a muted ringing, like a distant bell, begins to bloom behind her ears. She tries to ignore it. She cannot let them see weakness. Within seconds she falters. Her legs buckle. Gravity catches her unawares. The world tilts sharply, sky, earth, and faces all swirl in a blur of motion. She collapses, a low thud against hard ground, the sound swallowed immediately. Time slows. In her ears, every heartbeat becomes thunder, each intake of air a struggle. Laughter, quiet at first, then swelling, like a tide rushing in. Cadets pivot, some smirk, others glance away, but they all see. To them, this is entertainment, a spectacle of failure. Her chest heaves, aching, as though she were trying to heave out every secret she has been hiding. She cannot speak. If she opens her mouth, she knows her voice will shudder and crack. Better to stay silent, to endure. Above her, the colonel's boots approach, measured, authoritative. She is dimly aware of the shadows cast over her, two long legs framing her collapse. There is a pause. She wonders if he will order her up, demand she rise, demand she prove herself. She expects the humiliation to intensify. Her eyes flicker shut, though there is no respite there either. Behind her eyelids, she sees flashes, smoke. Screams. A blast. Burned metal fragment glinting in the incandescent haze. The memory retreats as quickly as it came, leaving her breathless, trembling. Briggs's voice cuts through the haze, not spoken aloud, but echoing in her mind like a grim mantra she's heard before. Weakness ruins the military, he said. Weakness destroys the unit. Weakness invites vulnerability. Now he is using her collapse, as his fuel. She does not know his words exactly in this moment, but she knows what he will say. She knows how he will frame it, as proof, as evidence. She becomes his exhibit, her suffering weaponized in the service of his speech. The weight on her chest grows heavier, as if the air itself demands she confess, explain, or rise and prove she does not belong in this place of strength. She cannot rise. She lies there, trembling, as other cadets shuffle around, glancing but not helping. The colonel's shadow shifts, and she feels invisible and exposed all at once, a contradiction she cannot resolve. Her mind drifts backward, flickers of memory like broken film, a hospital bed, white sheets stained with red, a brace biting into her skin, the smell of antiseptic and burnt metal intertwined. Someone holding her hand, someone whispering calm. But in the next instant, that gentleness is gone, replaced by explosion and darkness. Her spine arcs with pain as she tries to pull herself upright. A dull agony radiates from deep inside, as though the injury is alive, pulsing. She sees the colonel's boots again, looming, and she feels the judgment in the rhythm of his steps. She fights the urge to curl inward, to protect the center of herself that still bleeds silent stories no one knows. Time stretches. The morning air seems too thin, too sharp. Her breath rattles. And then, like a ripple through a pond, Hump's words, she knows they are coming. Briggs will speak of discipline, of resilience. He will tell them that to survive, they must master their bodies, their fears, their fragility. Her failure becomes his parable. But she is not a metaphor. She is not his example. She is flesh and bone, and something broken. Something unspoken. Inside her chest, a storm gathers, anger, fear, exhaustion. The world around her pulses with noise she cannot quite place, shouted orders, the shuffle of boots, the coarse laughter of cadets who see everything but understand nothing. She fights to hold on to composure, but composure feels like chains. Every breath she draws trembles with unspent fury. She closes her eyes, and in darkness she slips into flashbacks, the explosion's white-hot blaze, the howl of twisted metal, the scalding heat of fear, the blast that snapped her body, and the aftermath, blood-dark water, screams cut short, her own cry guttural and lost. And then the brace, cold and unfamiliar, wrapping around her spine, stabilizing something that had become broken beyond repair. A folded patch soaked in blood pressed into her palm, like heavy proof she must forget. Who gave her that? Whose permission allowed her to walk, or limp, into this hell again? Back in the present, she senses instructors moving. She feels overheard snippets, distant but cutting, no record of deployment. Who even signed this medical exemption? There is a name, but the signature is redacted. A blank line in her file where power should have been named. That absence hangs over her like a weight she cannot shift. It breeds questions she is not allowed to answer. She endures the scrutiny, but her fear spikes, not just of failure, but of exposure. She has kept this secret close, locked it behind every forced smile, every silent night in her bunk. The colonel speaks, not to her, but to all of them. He lectures on unity, strength, fitness, the unforgiving nature of their chosen path. He warns against softness. He warns against brokenness. He speaks of sacrifice. She watches boots, grit, rigid spines. His words land with ferocity and finality. She senses Briggs behind him, nodding, timing everything. The speech is not just for the cadets, it is a calculated performance. She is at the center, unwilling and exposed. When it is over, she does not pick herself up immediately. She stays where she is, wavering, until someone helps her to her feet. Every movement sends jolts through her spine. The brace digs in. She doesn't look around, she cannot bear to see their pity or their satisfaction. She swallows the rising tears. Her vision blurs, but she fights to remain upright, to remain composed, even though her body rebels. That night, she lies awake in her bunk. The barracks are quiet now, the hum of overhead lights muted, the soft breathing of her fellow cadets a distant lullaby. Her thoughts drift as darkness presses in. She touches the custom medical brace hidden beneath her uniform, cold, firm, a reminder of her fragile core. She feels for the burnt metal fragment she keeps in her duffel, tucked away, its edges sharp against her fingertips. She unfolds the blood-stained military patch, its fabric heavy with silence, and presses it gently against her chest. These items are her anchors, the tangible evidence of what she cannot explain. In the stillness, fogged memories surface. She hears the explosion again, a thunderclap, a jagged roar, then smoke that glowed in hellish tones. Scream echoes. Her world reeled. She tried to reach out, but the force shoved her away. Her body collapsed into chaos, then into something worse than chaos, a fragile shell that she now hides beneath discipline and rigid posture. Her thoughts turn to the instructors who have examined her file in hushed tones. Their curiosity feels like a blade, cutting deeper than any physical wound. She recalls quiet conversations just out of earshot. Why is her deployment blank? Who cleared her? The signature missing, erased, as if someone powerful wanted to bury the truth under layers of redaction. It's not just about her injury anymore, it's a secret someone dared to hide. And she is living proof. In the dark, shame and rage swirl together. She is furious at herself for collapsing, for being seen. Yet she is angrier still at whoever forced her to be here, in a regimented labyrinth that demands proof of strength she knows she might never fully regain. She resents the colonel for his blind demands, Briggs for turning her suffering into doctrine, her own body for betraying her when she needed it most. Her inner voice, soft but fierce, whispers through the dark, I told you not to make me do this. I said I couldn't run. I didn't want your pity, your lectures. I didn't want anyone's approval, just space, just silence. But none of that was offered. She realizes she has been boxed into a corner, forced to fight on someone else's terms. And now, on her worst nights, the memory of that redacted signature haunts her. It is a blank she cannot fill, a question she cannot answer, a load she cannot let go. As exhaustion gathers like storm clouds, she feels the pain in her spine spreading, a low fire that refuses to die. The brace digs, the fragment in her bag pulses in memory, the patch grows warmer in her hand, as though it too remembers blood and smoke. She imagines the faces of those instructors discussing her dossier, whispering about the anomaly in her file, the strange silence where a name should be. Their curiosity feels like accusation. Their questions, like judgment. Thunder rumbles in her mind, not outside, but within. Her memories swirl with foreshadowing, veterans she's seen in the mess hall with haunted eyes, injury scars hidden under sleeves, unexplained traumas. She thinks of whispers she has heard in the corridors, unidentified cases, classified incidents, anomalies in medical reports. Her own case, she realizes, might be part of something larger than her, a tangled web of power, secrecy, and fear. In the darkness she feels small but burning. She feels raw, and she feels silent. The weight of tomorrow's order presses on her, participation in combat movement drills. The colonel has made it clear, if she wants to remain, she will have to prove herself again. Not just in PT, but in simulated combat. She imagines the drills, the runes of strategy, weapons, sweat, and heat. She can feel the pressure building, a slow crescendo. In that moment, she embraces a strange clarity, she is not just fighting them. She is fighting herself, her own body, her own memory, a war without cease. The humiliation this morning will matter tomorrow. The redacted name in her file will matter. The blood-stained patch, the brace, the fragment, they will matter. And she knows that if she fails again, they will not let her forget. Silence deepens. The barracks breathe around her, shadows pooling at the edges of the bunk racks, as though even the darkness listens. Her heart beats hard, loud in her ears. She draws in a slow, careful breath. Every nerve feels wound tight. And then, as a final whisper in her mind, she speaks, I told you not to make me do this. The words are fragile, raw, enough to shatter even in the quiet. Pain presses against her spine, a slow-burning fire, but beneath it, something colder glows, defiance. She may be broken. She may be exposed. But she is not defeated. The chapter ends there, in the dim hush of the barracks, with her body trembling and her soul coiled tight. She lies still, clutching her relics of trauma, waiting for tomorrow's storm, and readying herself, even if her voice is barely more than a whisper. The morning sun hovered low over the training ground, spilling pale gold across the neatly trimmed grass, catching on the sharp edges of barbed wire stretched taut like a trap. Dust hovered in lazy motes, drifting through the air, catching on the wind that carried the scent of sweat, earth, and tension. The cadence of boots on the field was irregular today, broken by pauses, hesitations, murmurs. It was not the rhythm of a disciplined corps, it was the rhythm of uncertainty, of judgment pending, of confrontation looming just beyond the heat shimmer of the day. And at the center of it all, a shadow moved that no one fully understood. Olivia's boots scuffed the dirt with a reluctant precision. Every fiber of her body screamed for stillness, but discipline demanded movement, even as the memory of heat and metal under her skin pressed against her bones like an unspoken warning. The barbed wire glinted cruelly in the sunlight, each spike a silent interrogator, and every cadet's eyes, wide and curious, tracked her progress as if the next second would reveal some secret hidden in plain sight. Colonel Briggs' presence was heavier than the heat, heavier than the sun's glare bouncing off the metallic spikes. His voice had already carved itself into the morning, sharp and skeptical, demanding proof of capability, proof of endurance. To him, she was another cadet, another obstacle to be tested, another performance to dissect. He did not yet know that the story beneath the surface of her uniform, beneath the calm, measured movements of her limbs, was a chronicle of fire and chaos, of metal fused with flesh, of survival that defied comprehension. Olivia lowered herself toward the dirt, the first crawl under the wire, the familiar motion from training, now twisted with a memory that the body remembered more vividly than the mind wanted. Her hands gripped the earth, the coarse soil scratching at her palms, the subtle vibrations from her muscles screaming warnings that this was no ordinary exertion. Her legs quivered beneath her, small tremors at first, almost imperceptible, then growing in intensity as a sharp, unrelenting pain tore through the lower side of her back. The scream came without preamble, jagged, raw, uncontainable, slicing through the rigid silence of the formation. It was a sound that belonged to no training drill, to no performance of weakness. It carried history, carried trauma, carried a truth that demanded recognition. The cadets froze, eyes wide, breaths caught halfway, as if the world had halted to register that the woman before them was not a fiction of endurance but a living testament of combat and survival. Colonel Briggs stepped forward, initially with mockery, the air still thick with disbelief, the cadence of his authority unwavering even as the shift in energy began to gnaw at the edges of his certainty. But then, the fabric of her shirt betrayed her story. A rip, sudden and violent, exposed the battlefield etched into her skin. Half her lower back and side bore the scars of fire, of shrapnel, of a body tested and remade by war. Fused tissue, embedded fragments of metal, raised and jagged, glimmered under the sunlight, a tapestry of trauma that could not be rehearsed or fabricated. Time stuttered across the field. The cadets' breaths hitched, faces pale, mouths opening and closing like fish in water too shallow. Emily's hand flew to her mouth, tears breaking free without permission. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, brushing across the scars, as if carrying whispers of distant detonations, of nights spent in the dark, waiting for rescue, for survival. A medic sprinted forward, urgency in every stride, calling for a stretcher, professionalism laced with a visceral acknowledgement of the severity. The patch on her uniform, partially melted into her skin, was not just an insignia, it was a declaration. An elite unit, a mission that had left its mark not in medals alone but in flesh, in fire, in the unforgiving arithmetic of combat. Briggs froze, eyes wide, muscles rigid. His authority faltered under the weight of revelation. What had been mockery and doubt turned into disbelief and a creeping, unspoken fear. He had tested her. He had forced her into this crucible without knowledge of the fire she had already endured, of the battles she had survived, of the life she had carried beneath every disciplined motion. Internal storm raged within Olivia as well. Pain, acute and unforgiving, lanced through her body. Rage, tempered by the discipline of countless missions, simmered beneath the surface, a low hum in her veins. And yet there was vindication too, slow and powerful, a tide rolling through her chest, carrying with it the recognition that her truth, once invisible and disregarded, now demanded acknowledgement. The cadets could no longer hide their gaze. Each movement they had seen, each hesitation they had interpreted as weakness, now crystallized into reverent awe and quiet horror. They were witnessing a survivor, not a trainee, a veteran of chaos, not a performer of compliance. Their minds struggled to reconcile the disciplined figure before them with the jagged testament of war that lay beneath the fabric of her uniform. The sunlight seemed to sharpen around the scars, glinting on embedded fragments, casting shadows into the deep valleys of fused flesh. Every detail screamed of realism, of authenticity. The ground, once ordinary and neutral, became a stage for revelation. Dust and sweat clung to the air, charged with the gravity of a truth none had expected. A major arrived, urgency in posture, fury barely restrained. Briggs' authority crumbled, his previous confidence rendered brittle in the face of irrefutable reality. The questioning silence hung between them, dense and heavy, punctuated only by the cadence of labored breathing, the shuffle of a stretcher, the faint hiss of the wind through the barbed wire. And through it all, Olivia remained the axis around which chaos spun. Every tremor of pain, every tight breath, every quiet shift of her weight spoke of endurance honed by fire and steel. Her body was a landscape of trauma, her mind a map of missions and decisions etched into neurons as vividly as the scars etched into her skin. The world of the training field had been irrevocably altered. Power had shifted in silent, seismic ways. The colonel's presence, once unchallenged, now faltered under the weight of revelation. The cadets' eyes, once judgmental, were now mirrors reflecting awe, fear, and profound respect. And Olivia, her breath steadying, her pain simmering into a low, resilient hum, stood as the epicenter of truth, a living testament that neither mockery nor assumption could ever reach the depths of experience she carried. Every detail mattered, the flare of sunlight on jagged metal, the glint of moisture in Emily's tear-filled eyes, the faint, almost imperceptible twitch of muscle under her skin. All of it narrated a story far larger than the day's drill. The history embedded in her flesh spoke of missions that had left ordinary soldiers broken, of decisions made in the crucible of war that few could even imagine. And yet, here she stood, forced to prove what did not need proving, and in doing so, exposing the raw, uncompromising truth to those who had demanded evidence without understanding the cost. The melted patch was a silent scream of recognition. Not just a unit, not just a designation, but an elite history, a crucible that had forged a soldier capable of surviving where others could not. The very air seemed to vibrate with the unspoken questions of what she had endured, what she had seen, what she had become. Silence hung heavy, taut, as though the training field itself held its breath, unwilling to exhale until acknowledgement had been made. Every footstep, every movement, every conscious intake of breath became a note in a symphony of tension and revelation. Olivia's body, trembling yet poised, pain and endurance woven into every motion, became the narrative itself. No words were necessary. The scars spoke louder than any testimony could, louder than authority could assert, louder than doubt could whisper. The field was no longer a place of routine. It had become an arena of truth, trauma, and unspoken power shifts. Every eye had been forced to bear witness. Every expectation had been upended. And in that moment, Olivia was both center and witness, survivor and revelation, memory and present force. The morning sun climbed higher, indifferent to the revelation it had illuminated, yet everything beneath it had shifted. The wounds, the scars, the metal, the fused flesh, all told a story that could not be undone, that would echo in cadet memory and command scrutiny for years to come. The power dynamic had changed irrevocably. Authority now trembled in the presence of experience, respect could not be commanded, it had to be earned through undeniable truth. And as the medic carefully adjusted the stretcher, guiding her away, the eyes of the colonel followed her, unsteady, searching, incredulous. The field, once governed by drills and discipline, had become a crucible of understanding, a place where the facade of normalcy had been torn away, revealing history, trauma, and elite survival. And still, in the silence that followed, one question hovered unspoken, tremulous, almost sacred, waiting for acknowledgement. The base breathed like a living organism, corridors echoing with the quiet murmur of soldiers whose eyes darted and lingered in equal measure. Light filtered through narrow, reinforced windows, fractured and trembling across the cold metal floors. The hum of generators mixed with the distant rattle of boots, every sound amplified, every shadow pregnant with uncertainty. In the midst of this disciplined chaos, a single presence shifted the rhythm, Olivia. She moved like a ghost among the living, her form both present and absent, recognized yet untouchable. Whispers trailed her steps, hushed syllables that carried the weight of disbelief. No one spoke directly, no one needed to. Her reputation had preceded her, woven into the base's consciousness with a ferocity that made the walls themselves tremble. The confidential officer arrived without fanfare, stepping onto the tarmac with the precise, measured cadence of someone who had seen more than most could bear. His eyes scanned the formation, stopping abruptly, drawn magnetically toward her. Recognition ignited in the corners of his gaze, sharp and immediate. He straightened, stance rigid, a single nod betraying a respect that the colonel could only dream of. Olivia remained unmoved. Her silence was her shield, her legend carved in absence. The room felt smaller, tighter, compressed by the weight of collective curiosity. Rumors ignited like dry kindling, cascading through the corridors with unstoppable momentum. She survived an IED no one else walked away from. The words were spoken cautiously at first, then repeated with awe, reverence, disbelief. Soldiers slowed their routines to glance, heads tilted, lips parting in silent acknowledgement. Memories flickered in Olivia's mind, jagged shards of a past that refused closure. The desert unfolded in bursts of sun-scorched light and choking dust. Her unit had been ambushed without warning, a sudden cascade of explosions shredding the air with a sound that clawed at the inside of the skull. The vehicle erupted, a chrysalis of fire and metal twisting beneath the detonation. Instinct surged with terrifying clarity. She had thrown herself over the rookies, her body taking the brunt of the shrapnel. Pain had been a living entity then, molten and insistent, gnawing at bone and sinew. Darkness claimed her swiftly afterward, weeks dissolving in a haze of sedation and medical precision. When consciousness returned, the world was muted, her survival classified, her existence a ghost story in the files of Intelligence Command. Back in the present, the colonel's office was a stark contrast. Shadows stretched across walls lined with commendations, each plaque now a mockery of authority. He sat alone, the weight of scrutiny pressing into his chest, pressing into the hollowness that had replaced certainty. Review boards awaited, the corridors outside whispering his failings. He had humiliated her, endangered her, underestimated the spectral force she had become. His apology, when it came, was a hollow attempt at restitution, swallowed by her deliberate indifference. Olivia did not grant him acknowledgement, her silence was a verdict in itself. Emily moved in parallel, unseen yet omnipresent, an unofficial aide navigating the edges of this new dynamic. She watched Olivia with careful attention, noting the subtlest shifts in posture, the faintest tightening of jaw or flicker of the eyes. There was awe, but also the meticulous understanding of someone who had glimpsed the machinery of trauma and knew when not to interfere. Olivia's footsteps echoed along the hallways, a rhythm that became mythic. She walked through the base as if the world had been emptied of consequence, yet every glance, every shadow she passed, whispered validation of her survival, her legend. Whispers gathered speed, transforming into a chorus. She shouldn't even be alive, the words punctuated the air like gunfire, rapid and impossible to ignore. Soldiers lingered in the hallways, conversations halting mid-sentence. Eyes followed her, tentative yet reverent, as if proximity itself might confer some of the resilience etched into her being. Yet Olivia revealed nothing. Every question dissolved against the impenetrable wall of her silence, making her myth larger, more magnetic. The base seemed to bend subtly in her orbit, even the walls leaned closer to catch the whispers she did not speak. Flashbacks surged again, cinematic and unbidden. The desert exploded in bursts of motion, the IED under the vehicle detonating, metal twisting, glass splintering. She had fallen into instinct, shielding rookies with limbs shredded, the world distorting into an abstract mosaic of fire and pain. Pain had become language, survival the only sentence. She had awakened weeks later to a sterile room, monitors blinking with mechanical detachment, personnel hovering silently, recording her as a ghost survivor. Intelligence Command had classified her as such, a weapon hidden beneath bureaucratic silence. Her survival was not a victory, not yet. It was a burden, a secret fire that burned beneath skin and bone. The colonel's confrontation with accountability played out in the undercurrents of the base. Reviews were impersonal, reports objective, yet the room seemed to vibrate with the collective weight of judgment. Every step he took toward repair was mirrored by soldiers' eyes, calculating, skeptical. The hierarchy trembled under the gravity of her return, his authority destabilized by the simple presence of someone who should not have been alive. Leadership, once a matter of rank and decree, now required recalibration in the face of survival that defied expectation. Olivia's internal world was a study in contrast. Confidence simmered beneath measured control, validation tempered by the psychological distance she maintained. Each recognition, each whisper, was a testament not only to survival but to mastery over the narrative imposed on her. She allowed the myth to grow, to coil around her form like armor, protecting her from intrusion while signaling undeniable presence. The soldiers' awe was not enough to pierce the veil, they could revere, speculate, but never fully touch the truth beneath. Emily's role solidified in this matrix of observation and myth. She became the quiet interpreter, a buffer between Olivia and the world's ceaseless curiosity. Her presence was a stabilizing force, the lens through which the base could glimpse fragments of reality without overwhelming Olivia's carefully constructed distance. Together, they navigated the subtle power dynamics that had shifted overnight, the colonel reduced to apology, high command watching with quiet calculation, soldiers caught between reverence and envy. Foreshadowing lingered in conversations with high command, delivered with clinical precision. "You were gone for a reason. Are you ready again?" The words carried weight, not merely as a query but as an acknowledgement of her transformation. Readiness was no longer physical, it was a psychological and emotional calibration, a quiet recognition that the world had changed while she had been absent. The encrypted message waiting at the edge of her awareness was a signal, a tether to a future that would demand more than survival, it would demand leadership, strategy, and the continued mastery of silence. As the day waned, the base's atmosphere shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly. Shadows lengthened, stretching across corridors, mingling with the hum of equipment and the muted conversation of soldiers. Olivia's silhouette became the axis around which the world pivoted, a presence simultaneously ethereal and commanding. Rumors coalesced into legend, whispers crystallized into narrative, and every step she took resonated with cinematic intensity, a measured cadence that commanded attention without seeking it. Colonel Briggs remained isolated, the weight of misconduct pressing upon him, his reputation unraveling in real time. The contrast between him and Olivia was stark, one diminished by error, the other elevated by endurance. The psychological tension thickened, a silent battle of power and perception unfolding beneath the visible routines of the base. Every glance, every half-step, every shadow cast against metal walls told a story richer than any official report could contain. Olivia's internal reflection was methodical, almost surgical. Every thought, every memory, every flicker of trauma was catalogued and controlled. She walked the halls with deliberate precision, aware of the myth growing in her wake, yet untouched by it. The base had become a theater, her survival the silent performance that none could disrupt. Soldiers moved around her like extras in a carefully choreographed scene, the narrative unfolding with the inevitability of a slow crescendo. The flashbacks merged with present awareness, cinematic in scope, the explosion, the shielding of the rookies, the excruciating weeks of recovery, the sterile rooms, the monitoring eyes of intelligence. Each memory was a brushstroke on the canvas of her legend, adding depth, color, and texture. Pain, survival, and silence were interwoven into a tapestry that both isolated and elevated her. The psychological and emotional layering became a force field, insulating her from the ordinary world while projecting an aura of extraordinary capability. The chapter approached its conclusion with the subtle arrival of intrigue, an encrypted message, pulsing in digital silence, a signal that demanded attention. Its presence was quiet yet insistent, a prelude to the next stage of engagement, the next phase of strategy, the continuation of a story that refused to remain dormant. The base held its breath, the legend remained intact, and the tension coiled in the air like a live wire, waiting for the spark. The corridors grew quieter as evening descended, lights casting long, fractured shadows over polished metal floors. Olivia paused at the intersection of two hallways, the silence of the base enveloping her like a tangible force. Rumors continued to ripple, soldiers whispered in hushed awe, the colonel retreated into self-reflection, Emily observed with quiet precision, and the encrypted message pulsed unseen, a harbinger of challenges and revelations yet to come. The narrative of survival, legend, and leadership shift had been established, cinematic in scope and psychological depth, setting the stage for the chapters yet unwritten. The medical wing had been abandoned for years, yet the scent of antiseptic and lingering pain clung to its corners like a ghost refusing to leave. Dust motes hung suspended in shafts of pale morning light, drifting lazily through cracked windows that shivered in the early dawn breeze. The silence was not comforting, it was accusatory, pressing against her ribs as if the walls themselves remembered every scream, every labored breath, every clandestine procedure carried out under fluorescent lights that never truly warmed the skin. Olivia sat motionless on a gurney whose mattress sagged under the weight of memories, her hands resting on her knees, fingers curling into fists as the chill of the abandoned floor seeped through her boots. Her scars, mapped across her forearms and neck like jagged rivers, caught the early light, each one a monument to battles that no metal could ever honor. Her mind wandered, tracing the edges of her past as if fingertips alone could summon clarity from the chaos she had tried to leave behind. The missions that had demanded everything, the precision and ferocity that had made her both feared and indispensable, all of it lingered, a phantom pressure behind her eyes. She was alive, but the cost of survival pressed against her chest with a weight she had long thought she had shed. She had fled into anonymity, into the quiet of the world outside the classified corridors, seeking refuge in normalcy, yet here she remained, caught between the desire to disappear and the call that would not be silenced. The air shifted. It was subtle at first, a brushing of wind against the cracked metal frame of the door, a whisper that carried authority without words. She knew it before she saw him. The general's silhouette filled the doorway, framed by the soft luminescence of the corridor beyond. Time seemed to constrict around her chest as she recognized the rigid posture, the unmistakable cadence of someone who commanded obedience without demanding it. He did not need to speak, the invitation, the plea, and the ultimatum were all in the way his shadow stretched across the cold floor, in the slight tilt of his head that measured her stillness. The threat was rising again. She could feel it in her bones, in the unsteady hum beneath her skin. Memories flickered in fragments, fire and metal, the sudden silence after an explosion, the precise weight of a weapon in her hand, the quiet of waiting where every second threatened exposure. She had walked through war zones that others could not even imagine, but it was not death that haunted her. It was the survival that followed. She remembered the nights when her own body had betrayed her, when the echoes of explosions had been replaced by the ringing in her ears and the suffocating fear of waking with nothing left but pain. She had once thought courage was measured by the ability to face death. She had learned the hard truth, courage was surviving with every scar as proof of a life unwilling to remain invisible. Outside the windows, cadets moved in near-perfect formation, their movements precise, disciplined, almost ceremonial in their reverence. Silent salutes punctuated the fog-draped morning, shadows flickering across the cracked glass as they marked her presence without stepping inside. Each salute was a quiet acknowledgement, a gesture that spoke of unspoken loyalty, admiration, and the realization that what they witnessed was more than legend, it was the endurance of a force tempered by trauma. The ghosts of their own fledgling fears seemed to bow to the scars she bore, the resilience she embodied, the quiet power that demanded respect even without words. The corridors hummed faintly with a memory of urgency, of footsteps pounding against polished floors that no longer existed, of the low, constant murmur of strategy meetings held in shadows where mistakes meant death. Olivia could feel the weight of her former life pressing through the walls, a tactile reminder that the world she had escaped had not forgotten her. Every corner whispered tactical protocols, every rusted hinge hinted at secrets she had once been entrusted to protect. She flexed her brace silently, feeling the subtle clicks as it adjusted to her spine, a mechanical heartbeat sync to her own. Her scars tightened, as if even her body recognized the inevitability of return. Emily's presence lingered like a quiet echo, a reminder that some truths demanded acknowledgement beyond the sterile confines of the past. The melted military patch pressed into Olivia's palm was warm from the lingering heat of the forge, a tangible testament to resilience, courage, and the kind of strength that existed quietly, unseen but unyielding. It was more than cloth, it was a symbol that ordinary people could not comprehend, a small artifact with the gravity of an entire history. Holding it, Olivia felt a pulse of clarity, a convergence of memory, loss, and purpose that settled over her like a cloak she could finally wear without shame. Her mind wandered again, tracing the cascade of decisions that had brought her here. Colonel Briggs had been removed from command, stripped of authority in the same quiet, lethal way that truth often arrived, unannounced, irreversible, an acknowledgement that justice, even delayed, could shift the balance. The base itself seemed to exhale, a collective, muted recognition that the rot had been excised, even if the wounds remained visible. Olivia's own testimony had been the scalpel, precise and unflinching, cutting through layers of deception and authority alike. The echoes of what had been silenced now lingered in the open air, in the faint clatter of boots on distant hallways, in the soft gusts of wind that carried the scent of damp earth from outside. Dawn crept in through the high windows, spilling over the medical wing in fragile, golden shafts. Dust and light intertwined, forming ephemeral paths that traced the contours of scars and braces, of muscles taut with anticipation and nerves frayed from years of suppressed vigilance. Olivia rose, each movement deliberate, each step measured in silence. The brace shifted against her spine with a mechanical whisper, her scars flexing in time with her heartbeat. She moved with a precision born of decades of discipline, the weight of her past a tangible companion with every step toward the exit. The fog outside wrapped around the base like a living entity, curling between lamp posts, swallowing fences, softening the edges of the world she had known. With each breath, the mist filled her lungs, cold and insistent, reminding her that she was both leaving and returning at once. The vehicle appeared as if summoned by instinct, a shadow among shadows. Its engine was a quiet murmur, not the roar of urgency but the promise of purpose. The door opened without a word, an unspoken invitation, a tacit acknowledgement of the chapter she was about to write in real time. She entered without hesitation, the door shutting behind her with the inevitability of a seal. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of leather and engine oil, of roads traveled and missions executed in silence. She braced herself, hands tightening on the edges of the seat, the melted patch reflecting the nascent sun, burning softly against her scarred back like a warning, a signal, and a promise all at once. Outside, the world was still and expectant. The cadet salutes had faded into memory, the corridors of the medical wing remained quiet, and the fog stretched in rolling waves toward the horizon, swallowing familiar landscapes while unveiling paths yet untraveled. Olivia's mind was a mesh of reflection and anticipation, every scar a ledger of survival, every memory a tactical map, every heartbeat a countdown. She was no longer merely a soldier, she was a legend, reborn in the mist, carrying the quiet weight of invisible wars and unspoken victories. And then, over the faint static of a radio crackling in the distance, a voice emerged, sharp, urgent, yet measured, a signal that the past was never fully behind, that the world beyond the fog still demanded the kind of strength only she could wield. The road ahead was uncertain, the threat undiminished, but for the first time in years, the quiet power within her, tempered by trauma, resilience, and clarity, felt ready to move, to act, and to reclaim a place both feared and revered. The morning sun stretched its first rays over the mist, catching the melted patch in its light. Shadows danced along the contours of her back, the scars flexing like living testimony. The vehicle began to move, tires whispering over frost-kissed earth, carrying her into legend. And in the quiet of that dawn, the weight of history, of choices made, and of battles yet to come, pressed lightly against her shoulders. She was both survivor and warrior, memory and myth, the embodiment of a strength that had never needed an audience to exist, and yet, the world would see it again.